Welcome back to Menopause Mastery. So today I'm talking to Dr. Doni Wilson. She's a powerhouse naturopathic medicine doctor, midwife, clinical nutritionist, and the best-selling author of Master Your Stress, Reset Your Health. For over 24 years, has been on the cutting edge of helping women through their entire lifespan. But particularly, she's been focused on HPV, which is the human papillomavirus. And before you decide that you don't have HPV, you need to move on, let's run over some stats. Women in your 40s, 50s, 60s, we still get HPV and we still are at risk of cervical cancer. So the reality is this is important and particularly important to this age group. And so Dr. Doni has spent years helping women clear HPV, reduce their risk of cervical cancer. And this has been developed through her own experience and helping thousands of women. So Dr. Doni is a true advocate for women's health. So what we talked about today, just to understand, is the failure of the current conventional medicine system to help you prevent HPV from turning into cervical cancer and what you can do about it. And if you've been diagnosed with a high-risk strain of HPV, what are some of the things that you can do to take your health back? And we go into all of the details. We talk about the conventional treatment, the alternative treatment, and where you need to sort of understand the risks, treatment, and options so you can get rid of HPV. So listen in as we talk to Dr. Doni Wilson. All right, Dr. Doni. So we were just having this conversation before we got on air. And I think this is an area that women think is never going to happen to me if I'm over 40, but the stats really don't show that. So let's dive in. Why are women in this age group, why do they need to really worry about HPV and what that really means?
Absolutely. It's when we talk about HPV virus, I'm especially referring to the high risk types of HPV virus. There's over 150 different types of HPV. Most of them are low risk, meaning they're not associated with cancer risk. But there's 13 types of high risk HPV that are associated with cancer risk, particularly type 16 and 18. And the thing is that a lot of times women think, oh, this is just something that younger women are dealing with or thinking about. And while certainly the highest likelihood of cervical cancer can be between age 22 to 44-ish, actually what the studies are showing is that the average age of all women with cervical cancer is 50. And that means that there's even 20% of women over age 65 that are finding out that they have cervical cancer. So this is not something that's just younger women. This can happen really, it doesn't tend to happen before age 20, but from 20 on, this is something that we need to be aware of. And Betty, it's the third most common cancer in the United States and most other countries in the world, the third most common cancer. So this is, while we tend to push it away and not think about it and, you know what I mean, procrastinate getting our gyne exams, this is actually something that's really important, because when we can catch it before it turns into cancer, there's so much we can do to prevent it. Like, my real mission is to reduce cervical cancer rates due to high-risk HPV virus. And 99% of cervical cancer is caused by high-risk HPV.
Okay, so there you go. So like at the end of the day, the risk is pretty much 100% from the virus. So, and then I read somewhere that like 97% of women will have HPV sometime in their lifetime. And so my assumption is if you don't get pap smears on a regular basis, if you're not looking at it, you won't know, right? Because it may not have any symptoms. And you don't know whether it's a high risk one unless you have a pap smear to distinguish which one is there.
Exactly. And that's the thing is, really, there's this thinking that, oh, maybe you have a single partner, you've been married for 30 years, and yet I can tell you, because I've been specializing in helping women with high-risk HPV and abnormal pap smears and cervical cancer for over 25 years, so often I hear from women who have had one sexual partner and they're like, how did I end up with this? And so it's just to know that this is a virus that we are most all exposed to. By age 50, we're most all exposed and would test positive. The thing is that in years past, it wasn't standard care to test for high-risk HPV, right? For years, we would go for a pap smear, and as a women's health expert, we would first do the pap smear, and if the pap smear was abnormal, then we would test for HPV. But that is completely flipped now. In fact, it's more likely that when you go for your gyne exam, that your doctor's probably going to do a HPV test, even potentially before doing a pap smear, because of exactly what I just said, that 99% of cervical cancer is associated with high-risk HPV. So the guidelines have started to say, well, if that's the case, let's just test for high-risk HPV. And if the high-risk HPV, because the testing has become so accurate, so if we can test for it and it's positive, already now we know that that woman's at risk. And so you're also more likely to have your gynecologist tell you you're testing positive, and then more likely to have them recommend doing a biopsy. And this is the thing, is it's good that, I think it's good that we're catching it early, but I also want to warn women that you might find yourself having your practitioner recommend more and more procedures like biopsies, and you're like, wait a minute, how did I get here? What's going on now? And that's oftentimes when women kind of stop in their tracks and say, how did I get HPV? And isn't there something else I can do about it besides just more biopsies and more procedures?
Yeah, because it is definitely one of the conditions, or cancers, where it's kind of a watch and wait sort of thing. Find it, we watch and wait, we do a biopsy, and then we might do a colposcopy. Like we start stacking things
Yeah.
when the
Yeah.
risk is very, very high. So you and I were talking before the show that, what was it, like 13,000 women get diagnosed with cervical cancer, and you, like you said, almost 50% are going to be in our age range or above. But like the survival rates are low once it's become aggressive cervical cancer.
Yeah, it really, even just when you say that, it gives me goosebumps, because it's, to me, it's like, I've heard these heartbreaking stories of what women go through with, sometimes procedure after procedure, even sometimes having surgeries, and then being told, watch and wait, see if cancer develops. And then, yeah, 13,000 women in the United States every year are diagnosed with cervical cancer. 6,000 of those women die from cervical cancer every year, and that's just the United States. Around the world, the numbers are more like over 600,000 women being diagnosed with cervical cancer worldwide. And I want to remind you, as we're talking about this, that in my mind, this is all preventable. This is why I just get so activated about it and passionate about, and coming to talk with you about it and saying, hey, if we find out that you're testing positive for high-risk HPV, and if we find out that there's even because usually when you do a pap smear and a biopsy, we're catching it before it turns into cervical cancer. So we're so grateful we can catch it oftentimes before it turns into cancer. But we can, when we get that, like, either it'll be called either low grade or high grade. Sometimes the modern terminology is CIN1 versus CIN2 or 3. And what that's referring to is the severity of abnormal cells. So what happens is the high-risk HPV virus goes into the cells. It particularly likes the cells on the cervix. So it goes into these cells and hijacks them. It just takes over. And it starts to make the cell look more abnormal on a spectrum going toward cancer cells. So if we catch it early, like at a low-grade state or even a high-grade state, then we can take action. Once we know, we can not only help the cervix heal, right? So if there's severely abnormal cells, that's when your doctor is likely to recommend a LEAP procedure, or in other countries it's called a LETS procedure, to remove the abnormal cells. There's also a traditional holistic approach called escharotic treatments that I offer through my office, which is an alternative to the LEAP procedure to remove those abnormal cells. So the important thing is, if there's severely abnormal cells, we need to remove them, but that's only half of the equation, Betty. We also need to address the virus, because the trap that so many women get caught in is testing positive, finding out they have abnormal cells, going for a procedure to have them removed, going back in 6 months, finding out that the virus caused abnormal cells again, going through another procedure, going back in 6 months, finding out it happened again. And it's like a Groundhog's Day over and over and over. And I sometimes hear from women who've been in this situation for years, even decades. And the other thing that's so heartbreaking is when women even go through having a hysterectomy to remove the cervix and the uterus in an effort to remove the tissue that the virus keeps going after. And then sometimes they go back 6 months or a year later and find out that the virus went to the vaginal cells, and now they're dealing with vaginal cancer or vulvar cancer, because the virus can also decide to go to the vaginal cells of the vulvar area or even the anal area. And so there's some women who, are thinking, hey, wait a minute, I had this surgery to supposedly prevent this, and now this virus is still here. And so that's why my whole passion and purpose is about, yes, we got to remove abnormal cells, but let's go after this virus, because there's so much we can do from a holistic perspective, functional medicine, naturopathic medicine perspective, to help our bodies clear the virus. So this way we can put a stop to all of this.
Yeah, there's just so much to unpack there. So the reality is when we're probably looking at some of these other cancers like vaginal cancer, anal cancer, which killed Farrah Fawcett. I hate to break it to you, but also
Yes.
salivary gland cancer that can, it's not just there.
70% of head and neck cancer is caused by high-risk HPV, and not just in women, but also in men. So this is a rapidly increasing cancer for men and women. And sometimes for men, oftentimes they don't find out that they have HPV until they're diagnosed with cancer. So luckily as women, we have the opportunity to, we're kind of used to going for our gyne exam. And I really believe, Betty, that what's going to become the norm is for both men and women to be doing their own, because you can do now HPV testing at home.
Oh, nice.
And so I think that we're going to see a trend where more and more men and women are testing themselves for high-risk HPV virus at home to find out if they're testing positive, in which case they can start taking action to prevent it from causing cancer.
Yeah, like you said, the goal is to find it if you've had exposure, and to address the virus before you start getting abnormal cells and having to go through all of that. Yeah, because I mean, I know, just like you said, there's so many women that have gone through procedures thinking that they've removed that tissue, and so therefore they're not going to get it, and that virus attacks lots of other things. So let's make sure that everybody understands how you get HPV, right?
Okay.
There's
Yeah,
probably a lot of misinformation there too.
it's such a good question, because like sometimes, a lot of times, this is where the conversation begins. Women are like, how does this even happen? Why is this even showing up? Sometimes you might have been exposed years before, and you maybe just the test hadn't been done and you didn't know. We're exposed through genital contact. That's the understanding of how high risk HPV is spread at this point, is skin to skin genital contact. So it's not passed by drinking from the same glass or kissing on the mouth, or you're not going to pass it to, by sleeping next to your child in your bed. That's not, or from a towel. It's not known to be spread that way. It's known to be spread through direct genital contact. And so, and as you mentioned earlier, there's no symptoms of high-risk HPV. With the low-risk HPV, human papillomavirus is associated with warts. So someone might notice even warts on your hands is human papillomavirus. So remember, there's 150 different kinds, and they go to different parts of the body. So the high-risk types of HPV, those are the ones that are associated with cancer risk in these specific areas of the body. It's areas of the body that we've well identified, right? But the thing is, we don't want to wait until cancer happens. And so if you just have high risk HPV, It's not known to cause, like, you're not going to have necessarily like a vaginal discharge or pain or bleeding or anything. Some women, Betty, do tell me that they had a sense, sometimes women have a feeling that something was going on. If you have that feeling, definitely go get tested and let's address it. But in the medical textbooks, there's no symptoms. Now, the way I look at it is, as a naturopathic doctor and women's health expert, I'm always looking for clues, right? And there's gonna be clues of how this virus is showing up. Because here's the key to know. This is often debated, by the way, all the time. People are online and in Facebook groups questioning. They're like, but I've heard that you can't get rid of the virus. And this is a myth, a misconception from the past, because now that we have very accurate DNA testing of a virus, we can measure the viral titers. So we know, and research demonstrates this, that the viral titers can go to 0, meaning the virus is cleared and gone, and the human immune system has taken care of it. It's no longer existing in the person's body. So we know the human body, the human immune system and microbiome, we know it can clear high-risk HPV completely and ongoing into the future, even if you're exposed again. And I have many cases that I worked with to demonstrate this. Even women who are being exposed to HPV from their partner, it still doesn't test positive because their body has now mounted an immune response to protect them. And so it's really important to know that and to dispel that myth and to say, actually, that changes everything. If knowing that our human bodies can protect us from high-risk HPV, I mean, the other way the clue we know this, Betty, is that if you think about the millions of people who are exposed to HPV every year, millions of people are exposed to this high-risk virus, but not all of them test positive, right? If it was only about exposure, everyone would be testing positive.
Right.
So it's not that. It's that we're most all exposed, and yet only when the immune system is not able to protect us from the virus does it then remain in the system and test positive. And so when I see someone testing positive for HPV, right away I start thinking there's a reason why. There's a reason why the virus is positive. There's something about the system that's not fending it off. You know, the immune system's got to be depleted, the microbiome, and we can talk about all the different possible reasons why. Why is it that this person's system's not clearing it?
Yeah, exactly. Because I think that's where we can make the distinction, and where functional medicine really excels in this world, is because conventional medicine says, well, you can't really do anything about it. We're just going to watch and wait. Like you said, they're gonna go in and do a Pap smear every 6 months, and then they're gonna start removing cells or do a LEAP procedure. Whereas we know we can test through PCR, which is DNA technology, see if it's there. And then we can take proactive steps, which is really what you do, is you help women take these proactive steps to control and then release the virus.
Yep. And to realize, wow, because sometimes our mind, we get caught up in, a lot of times we get caught up in the stigma. What does this mean about me? Did I do something wrong? Why did I have sex with that person? We can get in our mind about it. And so really helping women to realize it's not that you did something wrong. It's not your fault. It's simply that as humans who have sex, we're going to get exposed to this virus. So what really we need to be doing is looking at it differently and saying, what is my body telling me that it needs help with? And I look at specifically 8 what I call susceptibility factors, things that lower our immune system and disrupt our microbiome. Number 1 being our stress exposure. When we're under constant stress and have trauma history, that already lowers our immune defenses and makes us susceptible. So that could be stress. I mean, this is one of the questions I ask women, by the way, and I invite anyone listening, if you're testing positive for HPV, ask yourself, have you had a lot of stress exposure in the past 2 years? I mean, we're now getting further away from the pandemic, but the pandemic alone was a huge stress, let alone like work stress, family stress, taking care of loved ones, whether that's taking care of children or taking care of parents. Losing the loss of a loved one is a huge stress. Having a divorce or moving a home. Also, this stress of toxic relationships in our lives, even trauma from childhood. What the studies show is anyone who has a history of abuse in childhood is increased risk of cervical cancer.
Yeah. Increased risk really of all potential cancers and dying, the adverse childhood experience, index for sure. I think this is really important to hit home for everybody. So, because most women will say, oh, if I'm super stressed out and I get to wintertime, I'll get the flu or I'll get a cold, which I
Yeah.
hate to break it to you, everybody, that's a virus. So
Yes.
the susceptibility to viral loads, so if you get the flu 3 times a year and you get the cold every time your kids come home with it or grandkids, that means that's a signal that an exposure to an HPV may have a chance to get a foothold because you're already unable to mount a response to another virus.
Exactly. That having frequent infections is that's one of the clues that helps us to see, oh, okay, if you're getting bladder infections, sinus infections, other types of vaginal infections like yeast or BV, all of those are increased risk of testing positive for HPV and developing abnormal cells. Also, for peri and postmenopausal women, the shift in estrogen makes us more susceptible. So,
Yeah.
if this is why I'm so glad you do what you do to help women to restore healthy hormone levels, because when estrogen drops, it changes our microbiome, right? Not only do we have our gut microbiome, but we have the vaginal microbiome, and they're talking to each other. They're related to each other. So the health of your gut microbiome affects your vaginal microbiome. And when estrogens drop, so does the healthy lactobacillus vaginally. So right away, with menopause, women become more susceptible to also other infections, yeast infections, BV, but also HPV. The thing that really I find in the research so interesting about HPV virus is so it takes advantage of that situation, right? It sees, oh, the estrogen's down, the lactobacillus is down, and it just decides to show up. And then HPV itself further disrupts the vaginal microbiome, so it's making it a healthier environment for itself.
Yeah.
So it's just taking advantage and then taking over your cells. And so once you understand that about the virus, you can go, wait a minute, this is my body, my health, my vagina, my microbiome. I'm going to be the one who says who's hanging out here. And we can take steps to restore a healthy microbiome. We can take definitely vaginal estrogen. It can be so helpful for this, because when we restore healthy estrogen and we restore healthy lactobacillus, Lactobacillus crispatus, then now you have a protected vaginal environment. And then if you also have gut health issues, including dysbiosis or imbalance of the gut bacteria, also leaky gut, so inflammation and unhealthy intestinal cells, that inflammation from the gut also causes inflammation in the vagina. And inflammation also makes us susceptible to HPV. So it's about going, hey, by understanding this, we can help heal the environment and help now your immune system, your hormones, your microbiome start protecting you again. You don't have to just be susceptible to this virus and just waiting for it to happen. You could do something about it.
Ladies, if you're noticing more fine lines and wrinkles, it's not just about aging, it's about the loss of estrogen. And that affects our skin structure, making it drier, thinner, less firm. But here's the great news: I've created Biased Mastery Cream to help. This luxurious bioidentical estrogen cream supports your natural hydration and elasticity. It's packed with nourishing oils like olive, jojoba, aloe, and coconut, so it feels amazing and helps soften those lines and bring back that healthy glow. I've been using it, and let me tell you, my skin has never looked or felt better. It's smoother, more radiant, and those little cracks and creases are way less noticeable. If you're ready to give your skin some extra love, check out By Est Mastery on the Metabolic Blueprint website. And that's metabolicblueprint.com/Biest Mastery. That's BIEST Mastery, Mastery. And your face will thank you.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the need for sort of vaginal estrogen. I mean, because even the stats on UTI, which is one of the most common causes for sepsis and death, really, honestly, especially in older women, it's like somewhere, depending on which study you read, 78 to 87% of all UTIs would be mitigated just by low dose vaginal estrogen. And that'll tell you how disruptive that is. Because I think the other thing, and you touched on it in the very beginning, is a lot of women in this age group, they're like, oh, I had those promiscuous days back in my 20s or whatever. It's not going to happen to me in my 50s, 60s, and 70s. But you know what? The stats are the largest, most rapidly growing group with STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, which HPV is one of them, is in the 65 plus range.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
like it is not something that just happens to the young 20-year-olds. And I think a lot of it is because of all these other factors that put them at greater risk, which means anybody that's like 45 and above, your hormones changing puts you at greater risk.
And women are, I think, more sexually active over 65 now than ever before, which is a beautiful thing. But I think we also need to just be aware, like, okay, how do I make sure my body is prepared for this sexual activity, and then I have the hormones. And as you know, now the research is really showing that vaginal estrogen is, I mean, you have to talk to your practitioner, of course, connect with your practitioner, but it's really considered to be safe for most women to use, and a very good thing for preventing all different health issues, including cervical cancer.
Right. No, I'm like, it's pretty much, it's on the table for everybody, including somebody currently going through chemotherapy for breast cancer or anything else, because it is so very, very protective. So now I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. So we talked a little bit like conventional medicine just looks and weights and cuts and looks and weights and cuts and looks and weights. What about the vaccine? Because I'm sure some people are like,
Mm-hmm.
vaccine, we're trying to get everybody underage, younger to do it. But what about the vaccine? So let's talk about that, because
Mm-hmm.
drawbacks to that. And there's, like you said, 150 different HPV viruses. It's not necessarily good for all of them.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Currently the HPV vaccine, the Gardasil vaccine, covers 9 types of HPV virus. 2 of those are the low risk types that cause the warts. So it's really only covering 7 of the high risk types out of 13. So it doesn't cover all of them. So, and it's recommended from from like teenagers, so it's really from like, I think it's like age 16. Now they've extended it up to age 45. You could get it to age 45. So if you're in that age range, your doctor may recommend, okay, let's at least do the HPV vaccine. And it's like with any vaccine, it's always important to weigh it out, right? What's all the information? Okay, it's just what I would say is to know that it's not 100% protective. Even one, it's only covering 7 of the 13 high risk types, so you still have some that are not covered by the vaccine. And the vaccine itself is not even 100% effective for the 7. So many women have had the vaccine and still test positive. So I always like to say that, because sometimes there's almost a stigma around that. People will be kind of like, oh, well, you should have gotten the vaccine. But there's many women who had the vaccine and still are testing positive. So I think it's important, yes, you have to make that decision for yourself and your family. Do you feel comfortable, using the vaccine for partial coverage, and definitely always investigate the risks, and make sure you're, covered for helping your body have a active response to the vaccine, all of those things. But at the same time, know that it's not just about the vaccine. The vaccine definitely has helped reduce some rates of cervical cancer, but it's not taking care of all of the cervical cancer, because again, it's not 100% effective, and many people are still testing positive even after having the vaccine. So if that's your case, then I encourage you to be like, okay, don't be hard on yourself. Just know this is quite common. And so now we need to take action to support your body to protect you.
Yeah, because I think and it's also that vaccine is not without potential side effects, and some of those
Mm.
at least if you read, some of the black box warnings and
Yep.
the case studies online, it's and there's a reason why they have an upper age limit,
Yeah.
because it's not going to be the same in somebody who's young and somebody who's older. So just like any vaccine, you have to kind of weigh,
Yeah.
is the benefit outweighing the potential risk,
It's so important. It's so important. Yeah. So it's like, and the doctor is likely to mention it. If you're under 45, they're likely to mention it. And I just always would say, just know that that's still like not 100% going to cover you. We need to still be like thinking, how else can we protect ourselves? And even when we think of like, okay, yes, we can use condoms, but even condoms, while they can prevent some spread of HPV, it's also not 100%. So I think we need to just be aware, like, okay, yes, we can take some steps to protect ourselves, but we also might still test positive. So that's why it's still important, I think, for all women to be aware of having a high-risk HPV test. And if it tests positive, then I welcome you to contact me, because what I've done is created all sorts of resources to help women and men to know, how can I handle this? Because unfortunately, that's not part of standard of care yet. Your gynecologist in your doctor's office is not likely to tell you that it has anything to do with stress or diet or nutrition, or they're going to just say to you, come back and retest. And usually women then walk out the door from the doctor's office in fear and start searching, and they're thinking, wait a minute, is this, can I change my diet? Is there some nutrient or herb I can take? And there are some that you'll come across out there, right? Like if you start searching. But the thing I want to warn you about is, sometimes you come across a certain product, one or two, that makes it seem like this is going to be the magic pill. And so I always warn you to be careful. It's important to work with a practitioner who can help you with a comprehensive plan instead of just a quick fix, because it's likely not going to just be a quick fix. We need to actually really look at your body and your system and say, hey, what needs attention here? And when we address it in a comprehensive way, that's when we really are seeing the ability to clear the virus and keep it gone.
Yeah, I think that's the really important thing is, you can't just sorry, people, I'm going to say this for Donnie. Donnie's being very politically correct here, but I'm going to say this as somebody who's been doing this for 20 years. And but human biochemistry is my jam. A single herb is not going to wipe out your HPV. You have to have a comprehensive approach. And I would say that's true for any virus. Most of the time, you have to address all these other areas, like Donnie sort of tapped into, those 8 different areas. You have to address why your body can't clear it to begin with.
Yeah.
And how to keep it gone, right? Because just because it looks like it's gone low or you don't have abnormal cells, it doesn't mean it can't rear its ugly head later on. And I think that's really, really important. The message being, yes, you can clear your HPV, you can get rid of it. And ideally, we do that before we start having abnormal cells, but you can't just do it with, 30 days of some random herb you read about online.
Yeah, so many, like a common one women will hear about is AHCC, which is a extract of shiitake mushroom that's been well researched. It was developed and patented out of Japan. It has research, but I always again like to emphasize the research is showing 63% effectiveness. So it's not 100% effectiveness, right? So we can say, hey, maybe this is part of our plan. But so many women will come back to me and say, I've been taking AHCC for a year and I'm not getting anywhere. And I'll say, well, it's because we really need a comprehensive plan. We need to do everything from looking at diet, because of course your diet does influence your immune function, your ability to clear the virus. Even, for example, sugar and alcohol intake, right? We know that sugar and alcohol lower our immune system, like you've been saying, and make us susceptible to all different infections, including HPV. So if we can go, oh, okay, let me look at my diet and see if I can reduce sugar and alcohol. Even, Betty, there's a study that shows that when we have blood sugar fluctuations, not even to the extent of diabetes, but I mean, certainly with diabetes, there's increased risk, but many people just have, slightly higher blood sugar, especially with postmenopause, right? It's like, oh, okay, our blood sugar's a little higher. That also makes us more susceptible to high-risk HPV. So helping to get your blood sugar levels optimized is also gonna help.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just think that's so important. And I don't, I think women just need to hear that this can be cleared. It's not something that you can't get over. And again, I think the social stigma is so important. It's
Mhm.
that women bear the brunt
Yeah.
of sexual activity. Men get applauded for sowing their oats or, their sexual conquests or their prowess and all those other things. But if anything goes wrong with a sexual encounter, it tends to fall on the women, right? From a cultural standpoint, which is absolutely inappropriate and unfair. And especially women that, like you said earlier, that might be in long-term relationships, they might be like, well, how could I have possibly gotten this? The reality is even if there was no promiscuity, because of course now women are probably thinking, wait a minute,
That sometimes is the case.
yes, that
Yes.
can be the case, but a lot of times it could also be that it was there and dormant, and where you had the right set of circumstances, stress and other things that fired up that now your immune system cannot suppress it, and now it has popped back into high play, right? So it's not necessarily always that, but it's often us who pay the price,
Yeah.
of fighting the virus, and so I think it's so important.
Yeah, it's true. And it's partially because we're the ones being tested. Men are not being tested. They're not, and with high risk HPV, they have no idea that that's even something to pay attention to. And so, yeah, as women, we're the ones who are finding out about it. And I look at it as that means we also get to be the ones who are doing something about it to protect ourselves. And often, what makes me very sad is to think of the 6,000 women per year who are dying of cervical cancer, and I know that a high percentage of them didn't even feel comfortable telling their family or their partner or anyone else because they feel embarrassed that this is the type of cancer that they have. And so I really want to break that stigma and say, hey, let's be more open about it. I'm so glad to be talking here, Betty, to be able to say, hey, this is something that women are dealing with. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how to have a healthy vaginal environment and protect ourselves, because this is just a part of life. Really, it's a part of the ecosystem that we're in with other microbes, and it's a part of life, and it's nothing to be judgmental to others or yourself about. And because what worries me is the more that this virus causes women to feel isolated and afraid, that actually works against us. Because now, in addition to all the other stresses in your life, now you have the stress of HPV and the medical procedures and the feeling alone and feeling isolated, and that just perpetuates the virus. So it's like we have to outsmart it, I say. We have to say, wait a minute, yes, I'm concerned about this virus, but I'm not going to let it control my mind into a state of fear and constant anxiety. I'm going to take action. I'm going to decide to wake up each day and take better care of myself. And women, we're not taught that. We're taught to take care of everybody else and not ourselves. So this is often a chance for women to pivot and say, I'm going to prioritize what am I going to eat today that's healthy food? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I getting some recovery activities, mindfulness and journaling and time in nature and whatever you're drawn to help you recover from stress and movement or exercise? Sometimes these essential daily activities can make such a difference on our immune system's ability to protect us from a virus like this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So obviously women need to get pap smears. So that old story that you're no longer reproductive, so who cares? You really
Right.
actually do need to get pap smears. Now the test that you were talking about, the home test, is that a vaginal smear, or is that
It's a right now they have a it's a swab. Like you can even like there's one that you can order from Everlywell, for example. Women can just order themselves online. Everlywell.com has an HPV home swab test. It's like $60 or $70 and comes back in a couple weeks. So you could do that, and the recommendation is to do that HPV test every 3 years, say from age 30 on,
right.
or it's age 30 to 65, they say. But I think really we should be checking. If you're sexually active after age 65, I would keep checking. But essentially, after age 30, every 3 years, do an HPV test. If it's testing positive, you're going to need to test more often until you get 2 in a row that are clear. And then you might even be able to go to every 5 years. But if you have new sexual partners, I would do it more often than every 5 years. The distinction is from age 20 to 30, they really recommend still doing a PAP and HPV test right away, but it's still every 1 to 3 years, depending on your level of risk. And so, and the thing I like to point out, like you're saying, a lot of times women think, oh, I'm over 50, I'm postmenopausal, I don't have to think about this, and I really want to warn women, no, you really need to, because it can happen even after your period stops, and even if you have a hysterectomy. So a lot of women have had a hysterectomy, and their doctors might even be thinking, oh, you don't need to come back anymore. But yes, you do, because the virus can still cause abnormal cells vaginally. So still do the HPV test, and even get a pap smear after a hysterectomy, because it still can happen. And the key, again, is I'd rather, because a lot of times women feel afraid, it's like, the last thing I want to do is go for this gyne exam. But the thing is, like, I look at it as, I would rather know, like, as soon as we know it's positive, or as soon as we know there's abnormal cells, then we can go into action. And I see women working through my protocol, and this is a protocol I've developed, over 25 years and helping thousands of women. And I've seen some cases that have been able to completely reverse abnormal cells and get HPV to negative even within 1 month of starting my protocol. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes a year. And we're not in a race. We're just saying, hey, let's start taking action, because we know if we start looking for these susceptibilities and addressing them, then your body's going to be able to protect you, and you can put an end to this whole situation, where you're having to go back and worry and wait. And you can be like, okay, now I can be living my life and living my passion and purpose, and not having HPV taking control of all of that.
Yeah, yeah. And wouldn't you say, like, if somebody's, let's say 50, but let's say they're on the dating scene and they're more sexually active, I would do it more personally. I would want to do it more often than once every 3 years, because that's too
I
long.
would probably do it at least every year, because at that point, it's just for peace of mind. And if it comes up positive, then you can take action. By the time you wait a few years, those are the standard guidelines. But again, they're not doing anything about the virus. So from my perspective, I'm like, I'd rather test, find out, and do something about it before it has a chance to cause any trouble. And these are tests that are becoming more and more available. So I wouldn't be surprised, Betty, if it's going to be where, again, like, this just becomes something that, for women and for men, something that we start being aware of. And that's part, I think, of more acceptance of our sexuality and femininity, and saying, hey, this is something that I can being my own health advocate for. I don't have to just be, waiting to see if it gets worse and then going through procedures at the doctor's office. I can prevent that.
Yeah, yeah, because standard of care, just the whole reason why is they're basically, if it's positive, they're going to wait until your cells get abnormal, period. There's nothing in between in standard of care. Whereas, Dr. Doni actually has an entire HPV program. So tell my listeners, if they're worried about this, or they've had an abnormal, PAP or whatever, where can they find you, and what, I know we have a free gift for them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a HPV recovery guide, and we'll share the link to that, because that's free, and you can read this. It's a downloadable guide, so you can understand better all that we've been talking about and how I help with it. I also host a free workshop online for women around the world, so we can talk this through and really help you understand your results. A lot of times, women are like, well, what do my results mean? So where I start is, here's what your results mean, here's what you can do about it. So, and you can find that, as well as so many more resources, at my website. My website is drdoni.com, so drdoni.com. And you can also go straight to clearhpvnow.com. Clearhpvnow.com, I have all resources, where you can learn more about how I help women, and see a lot of success cases. The women love to share when they've gotten this, they're gained their freedom from HPV, so to speak. And so we have video and written and audio testimonials, so you can really see that it's not just me talking about this, that the women are like, hey, Dr. Doni, you helped me, please go help other women, because really the healthcare system needs to change. But as you've mentioned, in the standard medical system, they don't learn about nutrition. They don't learn about the interconnections of the body, how to test the microbiome, how to improve the microbiome, even how to address nutrient deficiencies, let alone MTHFR and methylation. It's not part of their wheelhouse, right? Their wheelhouse is surgery. So just keep in mind, okay, yes, we're glad that procedures and surgery exist and cancer treatment exists for when we need it. But if you want to be able to prevent that, then we need to go a different route to get that done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Doni, this has been really, really great because, again, I think it's another one of those taboo subjects people want to pretend don't happen, particularly in this age group. And it's like, no, it is serious and it is an issue. And now you've given them a lot of information and resources at their fingertips. So thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you, Betty. It's my pleasure. I'd be happy to hear from anyone who's dealing with this and trying to figure it out and wanting more help. I would be happy to help you. So just reach out.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Doni, for
You're
being on
welcome.
Menopause Mastery.
Yay.
Thank you. And everybody listening, thank you for listening to Menopause Mastery. If this episode was excellent for you, please share it with a friend because together we rise.